In this series of conversations, we'll be discussing global food sustainability with guests who bring a deep understanding of the environmental and cultural challenges facing our society, and creative ideas on how to address them. I'm Ash Sweeting. Today we are joined by Anastasia Volkova from Regrow, where her team is developing technology to enable agriculture to address climate change.
Regrow is the infrastructure for decision support and incentive exchange in the space of regenerative agriculture, sustainable agriculture.
When it comes to sustainable food production, we are all responsible.
There's not necessarily a framework that we need to be coming from that, okay, let's put all the blame on conventional farming. Like the world forced farming to be this way because we wanted to support obscene growth that is not sustainable.
We need to look beyond simplistic solutions
to make this construct of regenerative agriculture. Whilst that all sounds very understandable, when you start applying it to different regions, you get very different realities of where it's actually possible to, say, do no-till and where it's possible to cover crop.
Sustainability is about much more than carbon.
I'm really excited about what it means for agriculture to decarbonize its use of synthetic nitrogen, because nitrogen ultimately is 300 times more potent than carbon. And we calculate everything in carbon equivalents. But if agriculture can get off of the synthetic nitrogen treadmill gradually, it would be such a relief for the system.
Is cheap food sustainable?
We do need to accept that the food should be a higher portion of our disposable income distribution than it is now.
There's a lot that's been written and discussed around the willingness of farmers to share their data. Is that a challenge that you've also faced, and is there any insights on how it can be better addressed?
Can I say it's overrated?
Understanding the motivations of customers and partners is critical.
If it's done for you, you're feeling like someone cares about you and wants you to be successful. And that's what we want to see. We want all of the acres or hectares of arable land in the world to get incentives to make them more resilient.
Frequently, the technical issues are not the greatest challenge.
And I think every entrepreneur learns this relatively quickly in their entrepreneurial journey, that you're really working on behavioral changes more than you're working on just improvement of the technology.
We will never benefit by ignoring the lessons of history.
We need to keep getting better educated on the lessons of the past and what are the potential solutions that have worked and will work. I guess the parting words for me would be that I think if you open any Greek philosophy book, you really understand how you're no different to that human.
Anastasia, thank you so very much for joining me here today. Agriculture and soil carbon, and using agriculture to address climate change. You've chosen a very easy goal for your company. Can you tell us how you got there?
Yeah, definitely. First of all, thank you so much, Ash, for having me and really talking about the difficult things that need to get done, because otherwise I think it's easy to get caught up in easy solutions that don't actually get humanity to a point where we can, preserve the planet or potentially save the planet that we live on. How we got here, I think it all started a very long time ago, where I felt like something wasn't quite right, and I did grow up in a drought-stricken region where pretty much all the crops that even we grew on the hobby farm were very much subject to the water availability, and I would always hear all about it. And although we weren't subsistence farmers in that sense that we could just go to the shops and get some food, I was pretty exposed in that semi-arid area to the understanding that, well, if it gets worse, then I'm not sure how we're going to grow food here. Seeing things like when I was really young and I got into the hospital for like the second time in my life, the amount of snow in the street was as tall as I was, and when I was only 5 years old, and I've never ever seen snow that tall anymore in my life in Ukraine, and that to me felt like one of the effects of climate change that I really could have experienced in my own perspective in life. And the more I started engaging with agriculture, having grown up in Ukraine, studied in Poland, France, and Australia, all being big agricultural exporters, I felt like some of the knowledge and information that was out there was not delivered to agricultural and agri-food decision makers in the right form in order for them to really be making the best use of it. And then when I was kind of maturing that idea, I realized that it's not just the information, the way it's presented, it's also the business model. You really need to shift the financial incentives in order to shift the mode of production. And I'm very happy to see that, through all the turmoil in life, like everything from COVID to supply chain disruptions to recent conflicts, it has really made the world stop and understand what it means to invest in supply chain resilience. And so I'm glad that we are having this conversation, and there's a lot of reasons to be positive about the fact that the voices of the people who care about resilience and climate are being heard.
The concept of using soil or agricultural soil to capture carbon, in some ways it's quite straightforward. You get more carbon into the soil and you drop the carbon out of the atmosphere. But with millions and millions of acres around the world that are farmed, where it's huge. And where do you start? Where do you actually take those first steps?
Yeah, and then the question becomes, where do you start? How do you scale? And how do you build a system that actually is equitable and accessible at the same time, is scalable? Because the old way of doing things was, okay, let's just tell everybody to do the farming the same way. And that results in that environmental damage and climatic loss of resilience, which is not great. So when you fast forward that, is you see all the different experiments, like with organic farming in Sri Lanka, that results also in horrible things. So I think where you start is with acknowledging that it's really important to go with first principles again. And it's shocking when you read or listen to a book like Jared Diamond's Guns, Germs, and Steel, where it's like, we are just the same first people. We are, again, plowing the land, planting the wrong thing, in the wrong order, trying to get the most out of the land and having to move on because we destroyed it and have to leave it behind us. And when you see that in Fertile Crescent and Easter Island, like it's a package of deforestation plus agricultural practices, you really start thinking, have we not intellectually matured to the point where we need to stop this? Like, there is a pattern. We're just deciding not to see it and to look somewhere else where still we can survive. And we're all like this. I'm not saying that any of us is out of that circle. We'll prefer to live in lush areas where we do not see drought and where it's pleasant to go outside and, I don't know, have a walk. Where do you start with implementing regenerative agriculture? With first principles, what are the things that are really important for every system to be regenerative? There's 5 principles of regenerative agriculture that lead to improved soil health. Those are, keeping the living root in the ground all year round, keeping the soil covered. It's a minimization of chemical and synthetic inputs to make the system more self-reliant, which also leads to the need to integrate livestock so that there is better circularity. And other principles that can kind of be teased out or packaged up together to make this construct of regenerative agriculture. Whilst that all sounds very understandable, when you start applying it to different regions, you get very different realities of where it's actually possible to, say, do no-till, and where it's possible to cover crop. That's not equally distributed in the world. Australia and Canada would be really good examples. There are areas where everyone's no-till, but no one is cover cropping because that extracts potentially extra moisture from the ground that you need for the next crop that you want to grow. So how do you deal with that? Or the temperatures are so low that there's no point in cover cropping. So I think generally from those principles, you then need to accept that it's not one size fits all, but it is working with every system that currently developed in that region and understanding how to improve it. Because even in those places where you cannot switch to cover cropping or you cannot switch to no-till farming, you're still using some kind of nutritional support for the crop. So it must be some kind of fertilizer input, manure, whatever it is. So how can we go from the types of inputs that are more emission heavy to those that are lighter in emissions, have less transportation and mining associated with them, are either more local or outright come from natural sources compared to synthetic sources. So I think, how do you get this to the whole world? It's really a question of incentives and the financial models, but how do you pragmatically envision this being available to everybody is through this agronomic, financial, socio-economic lens on what is working here, how can we enhance it, how can we take it to the next level without saying, here's a prescriptive list, this is what you need to do. Because whenever that happens, it all breaks, because nature doesn't work like that.
Thank you very much for that. That's so where, I guess, one of the things that has been constantly reinforced throughout my career and throughout my life is that frequently the cultural and the social challenges are harder or more challenging than the technical challenges. Doesn't mean the technical stuff is easy, but frequently that's the case from my observations. How do you balance the energy for solving the technical problems plus the energy for the social or cultural challenges?
You're absolutely right. And I think every entrepreneur learns this relatively quickly in the entrepreneurial journey, that you're really working on behavioral changes more than you're working on just improvement of the technology. And there are aspects of technology and science that can make behavioral changes smoother. They can reduce the hurdles to those behavioral changes. But I think when I was at the beginning of my journey, I thought, okay, it's really about better tools and then people would adopt them. But that only lasted a glimpse in time compared to my entire journey and our journey as a company. And the realization that, no, it's all about people, it's all about the adoption, it's all about what is a real problem. What is about the problem that they care about solving. And if you are not in that list, then they're not going to give you time, and time is money. Like, they're not going to give you money either if you're not going to give you time. So it's not important enough for them. So I think it's a little bit of a question of product market fit. How do you actually find product market fit? And I think all of the energy should be spent on that until it's found. Like, when you have the realization, okay, think this seems like a product market fit, and through it, we can improve through the relationships that we have with customers that really care about it, we can improve the technology. That's, I think, when it comes back, not necessarily into the fore, but at least into like equal parts. Like, you have to have a competitive solution in order to go and try to get market share. But as you kind of hinted, without actually spending a lot of time getting clear on what are the barriers to adoption and what are the socioeconomic strains that force the current behavior that you need to either undo or change or evolve, I don't think any innovation stands a chance. Like, there has to be either a regulatory requirement and push or financial incentive. Like, there should be a reason for people to change this big enough to overcome the hurdles of not changing, which is always easier. So I think spending enough energy, at least equal parts energy, if not more, on the product market fit and the adoption upfront as you're building the tool is something that I would choose as my way of approaching it, and people can take their own pick.
And where are you at with regards to that stage of the journey? And I guess a bit of nuance to that is, your website says you're in more than 40 or 45 different countries. So that's not only different physical or climatic conditions, but also different cultures, different languages, different religions, different socioeconomic levels. So where is Regrow at in that part of their journey?
Yes, we have been I think, fortunate enough to find our product market fit through relentless search, and I think we still need to work for it and fight for it, keep it, move it forward, because nothing stays the same. And I think there's two pieces to it. There is the top-down approach, where you're really working with companies that shape the industry, agri-food industry, to really try to impact a large percentage of arable acres of agricultural production, to really move the needle and get market share. On the other hand, the 45 countries come from our more kind of self-serve solution, which is bottom up, which is agronomic decision support, where anyone could log in their fields and say what they're growing, or we would be able to kind of help fill back the history of that and support them with information that is globally available, like satellite imagery, weather-based biochemical models that then could help them see, okay, my crops are not performing the same way, or here is potentially an issue that was detected. Here are the things I should kind of pay attention to. So I think this comes back to the fact that because we started with the first principles and built it ground up in a way that supports the building of the product that is available globally, we're able to really offer up the solution at such a scale without necessarily getting into what does it take for them to adopt it. And then we go more kind of top down, solving that adoption challenge in key markets very specifically, if that makes sense. So it's a dual strategy. We don't necessarily spread ourselves into like 45 country sort of, go to market strategies. It's more like, here it's openly available. Users in 45 countries prefer to get access to this product and do it, some crop management support with it. And then for the Americas, Australia, Europe, and Brazil, this is where we have this kind of more top down. What is the regulatory framework? Who are our main partners? How are we getting to the farmers? How are we working with the government? What is the regulation? How is it changing? That's kind of more of a high touch approach to those key markets, but balanced with availability of the software that can really help anybody and everybody if they choose that they would like to get those insights.
And thank you for that. And how do you see the balance, I guess, between engagement directly with the farmer, because they're the ones who are using the decision support, but they have less market power or less power to actually monetize better environmental outcomes, compared to engagement with other potential partners within the food and agricultural supply chain, be that the processors / retailers or further upstream with the suppliers?
Yeah, so the way we approached it is basically making the tools available and relatively self-serve, so that the advisors to farmers and farmers themselves could make use of them if they chose to get access to these tools. But in terms of the go-to-market, our strategy is more top-down on getting the forces that are downstream in the supply chain, so the retailers, the processors, engaging with their supply chains and pulling through that incentive. So arguably, Regrow is the infrastructure for decision support and incentive exchange in the space of regenerative agriculture, sustainable agriculture. This encompasses things like, scope 3 insetting programs for food and ag companies, but it could also be used to generate scope 1 kind of carbon credits, so-called offsets that can be leveraged by companies outside of the supply chain. It's the same infrastructure. The fundamentals are, how can we measure the ecosystem benefit that the farmer is delivering, and how can that be traceable, transparent, quantified in a way that when it taken in aggregate, farmer is not losing a lot because of the uncertainty and the quality of their data, but like if they're grouped with other farmers, the downstream player that provides the incentive has enough certainty in how that was calculated and transparency to kind of trace it back when they need it audited or verified. So we've gone and said, okay, instead of trying to aggregate the farmer power, what Regrow is really good at is engaging larger downstream players to bring those incentives forward into their supply chain, because we know how to interact with upstream, and often is a mystery for the downstream. So how do you interact with ag retail, companies that provide input to the farmer, work with the farmer? For some folks in the middle, like processors and traders, this is not a secret. They're equally well versed in upstream and downstream, but still we act as an infrastructure for them to pull through those incentives and outcomes and exchange them. So for us, our way of bringing these opportunities to farmers is partnering with brands downstream in the supply chain and bring forward those incentives, because that then enables farmers to participate and have options, as opposed to trying to aggregate what farmers can do and try to offer it up. Like it seems to work better when you have a demand and you need to kind of aggregate and access the supply to fit that demand, rather than trying to find the demand for the supply that you generated. And there's a little bit of a chicken and the egg. I'm sure you understand. It's a dance where you have to like do both at the same time. But I think our partners are doing a great job kind of, marching towards their net zero goals and engaging their supply chains. And what that enables us to do is to bring these opportunities to more farmers globally.
Thank you. Thank you once again. More great insight. The balance between, I guess, the different industries, so row cropping, horticulture, livestock, they've, many quite different operations from a farming perspective, different impacts on the climate, different levels of, I guess, intensity of production. How do you see that from your perspective? And back to what you were saying about the people that are coming to you, how are you seeing the demand of your products across those different sectors?
Yeah, a great question. I think it gets into how ready are the solutions for the different sectors, because for cropping, the data availability is so much higher than for other systems like livestock sector generally. And you had Justin on the podcast before, right? AgriWeb has really moved mountains in terms of the adoption of digital record-keeping software by grazers or by ranchers. And I think generally that part of agricultural production is just a little bit behind the adoption curve, simply because cropping had all the machinery that started capturing data by itself, and you needed to add a little bit more to make this a complete picture, or maybe sometimes you didn't even do that. Whilst with livestock, we only recently got smart collars and all the things that would at least track the actual movement of animals, and then you can add additional observations like the pasture was this high when we got in, the pasture was this high when we got out, or weighing the animals when they're entering and exiting. So more measurement has entered that space fairly recently. And I would put horticulture and perennial crops after that even. I would say dairy is very much somewhere in that broader livestock sector with the grazing, with kind of the range and kind of the beef supply chain, so to speak, because there is, of course, dairy on pasture that follows a similar pattern. But there is also dairy and any kind of also beef operations that are not pasture based, and this is where you have fewer opportunities for really emission sequestration reduction, given you don't actually have animals on the land sequestering carbon. So for us, that maps to the maturity of our solution. So we have great R&D that is ready to be commercialized and has been kind of used in a number of ways with the government and the regulators in the dairy or in beef sector. And now we are getting enough interest from the market, enough interest from the brands, from the producers to actually jump in and commercialize that. But it is going to be a collaborative process where they would need to be willing to collect more information to feed the decision support for it to be smarter, and decision support will hopefully guide their data collection efforts so they can be more efficient with their time. And it's the virtuous cycle that we have started seeing and kind of operated in cropping for quite a number of years now. And I can see that we successfully did that. We survived it, and industry has caught up with that kind of data collection. And everyone really treats it as situation as normal, not as like, oh my gosh, the fact that you're doing the zoning and application of nitrogen differently across your field and you have machinery to actually do that variable rate as extraterrestrial. Like, this is normal now. This is more normal. I'm not saying this is like 100% pervasive through the market either, but it's entered on that adoption curve more of a, it's definitely closer to being fairly available. So I think for the other sectors, we see demand emerging more strongly now, and we're definitely going to commercialize these solutions. That's part of the roadmap planning that we have for later this year and early next year.
There's a lot that's been written and discussed around the willingness of farmers to share their data. Is that a challenge that you've also faced, and is there any insights on how it can be better addressed?
Can I say it's overrated? I think it's
definitely you can say it's overrated. I guess there's an interesting people talk about the lack of capital, especially in Australia, I guess, for venture. And that's one of the reasons why there's less innovation there. And with my experience, I've seen where there's a profit to be made, money always seems to be able to find that, whether that's the deepest, darkest part of Africa or the middle of a conflict zone. It's about providing the right incentive. So I guess by saying it's overrated, am I putting words in your mouth if I say that it's all about having the right value proposition?
Exactly. That's where I was going to go with it. That, like, I think it's all about having the right value proposition, and of course there's also the understanding that sometimes that message comes from the businesses that have built this service around really high touch engagement with farmers that does include kind of constant boots on the ground. And there is definitely that. I mean, this is not a secret. We're talking about innovation and technology, and there's always this threat that, it's going to displace some workforce from somewhere. It's actually all a very interconnected discussion, because we're finding ourselves in places where people say, but Regrow, aren't you finding it challenging that, satellite imagery, you're able to translate that and weather data into fairly accurate estimate of what grew on the farm, and what were the impacts of that, and farmer with only a few inputs additionally can provide you kind of the full picture. And we say, why would the farmer do that? Because what is the rationale, and what are we trying to do here? How are we using that data outside of engagement with the farmer? We are not using that data outside of the engagement with the farmer, and the engagement with the farmer is created in a way that reduces the hurdles, does not ask them to enter more data that already can be gathered either from farm management systems that they do use, or from open sources. And everyone ultimately wants to be the editor, not the initial writer. So if they come and they see a pre-filled table that says, it's a 70% chance and certainty that we understand what you grew here, and would you like to confirm or give us the information from your farm management system so we know exactly what was there? Because it's going to improve your chances of getting higher ecosystem payment outcomes. And that is the only way that data is used. And it's used also, I guess, in aggregate to look at the whole project for someone who's invested in it. That, I think, is very fair and transparent conversation that reduces the farmer data burden to such an extent that is a value proposition they really care about. Like, if I can only with a few clicks understand where my farm is at on the baseline of carbon and what is my potential, I want to do that. Do I want Regrow to make it really hard for me and pretend like they can't pull this information? I don't think I'd be as willing to adopt. And I think that is the balance of how do you do the dance of bring the information that's available, that's objectively out there, that people do know is out there, to the table in the most useful of ways, and being transparent about how it's used and how it's not being used. I think that's where you create the value proposition that extinguishes the discussion about they don't want to share their data. Okay, well, there's a checkbox for it. If they don't want to share their data, they should not share their data. And then how, without the data, you're going to prove your ecosystem service existed and therefore access these benefits. It's fine if you don't want to, but that is the equation here. Better data on better practices means better incentives.
And essentially you're doing the lion's share of the work for them and asking them to confirm rather than saying, here's a blank sheet of paper, can you do our work for us? So it's make it easy for them and make it worthwhile for them.
Exactly. It's like, you're using a tax payment solution. You're uploading your data from your employer and it passes all the information for you and says, Ash, can you confirm that this sounds reasonable? It's ultimately your claim, but we try to make it easy for you. And the solution is not bulletproof. So maybe if you had like a typo or there's lots of line slips somewhere, it's going to pick that up. But ultimately, it's your choice to use it or not use it even. But I think it's that lion's share of the work that if it's done for you, you're feeling like someone cares about you and wants you to be successful. And that's what we want to see. We want all of the acres or hectares of arable land in the world to get incentives to make them more resilient, because we know climate future is a bit tumultuous for the next few decades, and it's better to reduce that resiliency. And if it means that the conversion and the adoption of by farmers would grow, if this is the work that we did, we will do it.
Thank you very much. At the end of the day, you're a technology company, so I probably have to ask you something about technology. And what exciting new technologies or innovations are there currently in your sights or on your radar that you're looking to bring into your system and think could add extra value?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. And we are, Regrow is a technology company. We are a farmer-first agri-food decarbonization software. So the things that we really care about and really get excited, and I think, how kind of Regrow got to be formed through the merger acquisition of like an agronomy decision support company and a carbon modeling. And that merger really meant that you took the best of the agronomy decision support and merged it with a really good understanding of the soil carbon modeling and ecosystem outcomes. And what sits in between these two things is application of plant nutrients. So it's an application of fertilizers, synthetic and biological. And we have some of the best sets of modeling and crop and soil simulators to be able to grok this problem. And the team has been working on this specifically. So we're very excited to look into the future where not only the farmers who are eligible for new no-till and new cover crop adoption, but all of the farmers that all of the commercial farmers that have to use synthetic fertilizer have options to reduce that use, target that use, and also potentially switch to biological in time as those solutions come online. And the data on the effectiveness of those solutions becomes available. We use it for modeling and introduce those solutions as options for farmers to adopt. I'm really excited about what it means for agriculture to decarbonize its use of synthetic nitrogen, because nitrogen ultimately is 300 times more potent than carbon. And we calculate everything in carbon equivalents. But if agriculture can get off of the synthetic nitrogen treadmill gradually, it would be such a relief for the system on the world will have to change. The mining will have to change. The whole supply chain around it will have to change. And I think you can see the input companies adopting that and moving towards it, and acquisitions by chemical companies or the biological companies, and incubation and search for the new molecules and solutions. All that is very exciting. We look at it with a lot of hope into that future, that we have the tools to model it. We are working with partners to help them understand what data we need to bring those solutions to farmers, because ultimately it would mean, alongside other solutions like livestock integration, etc., and looking into water quality, quantity, biodiversity, increasing that pool of ecosystem outcomes and benefits that farmers can get payment for. That is the world we want to live in. Like, make it accessible for a broader pool of farmers outside of just a few kind of starting practices that are easier for the market to trust, for us to monitor, measure, and verify, into a more expansive pool where we're looking not just at emission-free world, but at a biodiverse and ecosystem restored world. And technology plays a vital part in that, because ultimately we have a measurement and management as two parts of the same whole. You can't do one without the other.
So many wonderful questions that follow on from what you've just said there, also big questions. And I think one, what you mentioned about the fact that sustainable food production is about more than just the carbon side of things. There's the biodiversity side of things. And I guess that also links back into the nitrogen discussion. And, crops need 15, 20 odd different nutrients to grow, but a huge part of the world's farming is dependent on 2 or 3 nutrients put on. So in many ways, I think it was Carl Wepking from the University of Wisconsin was saying that many people are considering that kind of farming almost an extractive industry like mining, rather than certainly not a regenerative industry. So any comments on that side of things?
It's unfortunate, and it's unfortunately true. I think I have a little bit of kind of personal history background that I want to bring into this. We were asked by one of our kind of supporting ecosystem kind of catalysts that work with startups, like, do you consider yourself coming from an extractive farming system where it's really about doing all it takes to grow the yield and putting on the synthetic things? Or do you consider yourself coming from a more regenerative system by the way you were kind of born and raised and what you saw? And for me, it's quite a mixed experience, because mom farms regeneratively. Like, she's still even, fleeing Ukraine, coming here to California. Like, she still has all the, composting practices already implemented in our apartment, and, balcony is already a green haven. Because that's just the way she thinks. And when we went to visit regenerative farm recently, she said, isn't that America is ahead of the world on thinking on most things? Aren't all farms regenerative here? And I said, Mom, I should probably not take you to the Midwest. You probably will not like that kind of experience, at least not to the heartland. And on the other hand, like in Ukraine, just next to our little garden veggie patch production area, there was like 1 hectare total. Across the road was a commercial farm. You would see sunflowers, we would see potatoes, we would see good rotation, but conventional practices, not necessarily regenerative. And Ukraine has extremely rich Ternozem, black soils, and I think you can ride that wave for long enough time, but then you start losing the water table, water holding capacity, and suddenly things yields seem to wither. So I think there's not necessarily a framework that we need to be coming from that, okay, let's put all the blame on conventional farming. Like, the world forced farming to be this way because we wanted to support obscene growth that is not sustainable. So we've seen some data recently that we've peaked the max agricultural production area in the world already, and we're actually decreasing it. And I'm really hopeful that the trend could continue, that we return some land to more regenerative practices, to nature, to restore itself, but also are able to kind of measure these two sides of growth appetite that we have as humanity with the need to feed ourselves. So I would really think about it from the perspective of, have we created a new paradigm where the food system can enter more regenerative and that becomes the norm? Not yet. We're just starting to talk about it. We're starting to do it. But I think knowing we're on the clock and 2030 is not very far away, and all of those, from 19 to 24% of emissions coming from the land sector will have to go, and everyone's very incentivized to decarbonize, because otherwise there is no certainty of everything, no certainty of production, no certainty of food supply chain, no certainty of food on the shelves, nothing. And I think people don't necessarily see that doom and gloom, immediately as clearly, but it's starting to permeate the, common consumer field of view, with the Ukrainian supply being blocked and with the prices rising across the board. And you can see the energy connected to fertilizer, connected to food production. So these are the chains that people should start connecting. And we need to continue the education on the fact that, okay, the alternative paradigm will take time to shift to, and we need to start on this now. And the food, as cheap as it is in America, that just shouldn't happen. Like, I understand for many reasons it was done this way, but we do need to accept that the food should be a higher portion of our disposable income distribution than it is now, in order for the system to actually be able to self-restore in some years.
Thank you very much. There's a lot there, and you mentioned Jared Diamond and Guns, Germs and Steel, and I think there's a lot we can learn. Not that history is going to repeat itself, but there's a lot of lessons from history, anything from when you look back to soil regeneration, or you mentioned the Ukrainian soils being some of the best, if not the best in the world, and then you look back to older societies, and the Egyptians were probably, or the ancient Egyptians were probably one of the most sustainable societies, but the Nile flooded every year and regenerated their entire agricultural land. Whereas if you look at the Tigris Indus River, not Tigris and Euphrates River, sorry, which is the edge of the Fertile Crescent, I guess. And after irrigation there for a number of hundreds of thousands of years, the salinity is what led to a big decline there. So there's a lot of prior lessons in that regard that we can learn from.
Definitely. And I think those are the lessons we have to learn from if we were to claim that we're, the most developed species, because I don't think we have as much buffer as we previously had to experiment with this planet, and not really considering the implications of our actions. And we're doing it at a very big scale, and the whole system needs to change. And I think there is a lot of momentum behind the change that we now all want to see. So I think it's really important to learn the lessons, to understand what can happen, and those things happen very quicker than we know it.
And obviously, you're Ukrainian, you grew up in Ukraine, and so the Russian invasion of your homeland is obviously, and all the horrific things that are going on there is a very personal issue for you, because your mum was there, and you obviously also have friends and family there. But there's the other side of that, and that's how that's affecting the food supply globally. And we go back not so many years to 2008, 9, 10, 11, and the Arab Spring, and a lot of the political instability that led to was basically around food price spikes, be that induced by local droughts, or by countries stopping or closing off or nationalizing their food and preventing exports. So we've got the first step of that is suddenly the sanctions have taken so much of the traded grain off the world market. But then we've also, in many ways, got the fact that the Russians, Putin, is essentially weaponizing food. So deliberately preventing the export of grain from Ukraine to try and put further pressure. And you've got food crises in Africa. You've got a current political crisis in Sri Lanka, largely linked to food. The Middle East is always going to be unstable there. Egypt, the world's largest wheat importer, has only recently recovered from the Arab Spring, or regained stability from the Arab Spring. So I guess both from a Rego perspective and from your personal perspective, how do you see this playing out?
I think you've covered it really well, and those are kind of the previous times that this has taken place in the history. So I think the fact that Russia is taking the grain out of Ukraine, occupied territories, as soon as they have a bit of a hold on it, and actually transporting it to Russia, the fact that this regime, it's impossible to think it's now going to collapse. We're in 21st century, and this is like medieval techniques of like on one hand, the thinking is medieval. On the other hand, it hasn't been such a long time that the First and the Second World War have seen probably similar techniques and, you know, unhumane treatment of societies. But I think focusing on the food crisis aspect of it, it is playing out in very much a predictable way. Like, what are the levers that can be pulled? And given that Ukraine is such a big exporter, that is an obvious one to gain control over it. The European dependency energetically, or like on energy and resources from Russia, is certainly not helping here. And I think there is overall a bigger conversation that started long time ago, and now is kind of swinging in all directions as to how Europe will decarbonize, and how US will help it decarbonize, especially the energy sources, to lessen or release them from that dependency. So they're not being held over a barrel with this weaponized food supply and frankly the energy dependency. Unfortunately, what we're seeing is there was a spike in attention and action when it all started, and now it started late February. We are now at the beginning of June. Really, what everyone is pretty afraid of is this turning into a long-term, lasting conflict that is not something that Ukrainian people should pay the toll for with having done nothing. Just because that's kind of the power struggle on a global scale. And Ukraine is not the first nation to experience that and that type of aggression, as you discussed, but I think it's one of the more prominently producing nations that has been captured into this clutch where the food is really the part of the conversation right now. The solutions to this, I think the steps have to be taken on the political, very high political level to try to resolve this. As agri-food industry, we have to invest in resilience more. If we expect that wheat to come out of Australia or to come out of places in the US, I don't think we have a lot of buffering there. And plus, with the fertilizer prices going up, there is a need to invest quite heavily into innovation on decarbonized sources of nutrient inputs that are affordable and potentially local, so they don't create this dependency and weaponization of inputs into food either, to really try to break these two dependencies between energy, mining, food production, and how currently they're completely interlinked for all of us. I hope that the food system will continue to be as global, and we won't fully swing into, okay, we all need food sovereignty, because I think it's unsustainable for the planet. We're a global community, and the weather just doesn't work in the favor of any particular nation. It just keeps swinging because we all have one atmosphere that we're warming up. So the food system has to be globally balancing, and I think it's that cut off and shut down of the Ukrainian supply that really shows where it puts the strain on other elements of that food system that is not balancing anymore. And, you know, I'm not a political expert, and I don't have any idea how to negotiate with someone who's inflicting that type of war. But I can say that from the innovation and technology perspective, supporting the solutions for enhanced resiliency at the farm level is a must. And if the governments are not taking this seriously enough, that's probably it might seem a bit weird, but this is like the second most important thing after really being energy independent, or decarbonizing the energy supply sources, because arguably we've figured out how to produce some food with just the energy sources and some basic ingredients, which is great. We're reinventing supply chains, but I think for as long as we're farming on land and that land needs inputs of some kind, creating the fallback options for providing those inputs is what will create more stability across the geopolitical landscape, because war and famine always go together. For, war somewhere means famine elsewhere, or there's always that dependency.
Most definitely, most definitely. Thank you very, very much. I would love to stay and talk for longer, but our time is up. So thank you so very, very much.
Thank you so much, Ash, for a thoughtful conversation, for the research that you do in the background. And I think we need to keep getting better educated on the lessons of the past and what are the potential solutions that have worked and will work. I guess the parting words for me would be that I think if you open any Greek philosophy's book, you really understand how you're no different to that human. And that is a very, very big lesson in how we should look at the past and really see that fundamentally the human parts of those equations, the motivations are the same. So we should try to learn from what worked in the past and try to apply it to save ourselves and the planet for the long term.